Trenton Romph is the head of marketing at Closed. He started his career in architecture and design, which taught him to think holistically about problem solving and centering everything on the end user. He's been in marketing for over a decade with a broad range of roles like project management, demand gen, content, digital, director of marketing, web development, adjunct professor, and more. Trenton is also a marketing advisor to a private equity firm and consults with several businesses on their go-to-market motions. Hey, Trent, welcome to Win-Loss Week.
Happy to be here.
I wanted to talk to you in the context of Win-Loss Week about a certain aspect of marketing that I think is really important. And there's a lot of conversation going on around it right now, and it's marketing attribution.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the pain points in that conversation happening in the marketing world right now?
Yeah, we can just talk about the last 8 years of my marketing career before Closed, where it was all pain around marketing attribution. There was a few bright spots in there where CMOs I worked for, and they were like, you can't measure everything as smart as digital technology and tracking has come. You can't measure everything. Like, we're not the NSA, we're not actually listening in on every conversation people are having. So it's a missing, kind of losing game. And a lot of marketers, the pain and the misguidance that I see a lot is they focus way too much on how many leads are we going to get from this, because that's something they think they can track. And they can see, oh, this lead converted on the last conversion or the most recent conversion, first or last, however you want to measure it, on this ebook. And they think, like, we're being smart, we're being data-driven. That's like everybody's favorite thing to throw around. I'm like, yeah, you're being like data-driven, but the data is this big, it's not this big, right? And so the attribution game leads marketers to focus on, how do I get a bunch of leads? And it doesn't guide marketers down the path to, how do you actually make your company win? And this was really poignant to me. Like, I'd always thought about this idea, and like things had felt off, and it never really came fully clear in my mind until I had a huge transition from like a very, very early stage startup before I joined Closed, where we were trying to play that game all day long. And I remember the interview process was like, hey, come to us with a full go-to-market model and show us like how many leads you think you're going to get us and what your win rate is going to be and all these things. And it was just BS. Like, this company had only sold to 10 other companies. Like, they had no customers. They didn't have any marketing spend. So there was no data behind this. So I remember, like, well, how do I build this? So I'm looking at like benchmarking. I'm looking at reports from HubSpot and from Google Ads, white papers from vendors in that space. It's like, oh, the average click-through rate is 0.5%. And I'm sitting there in a spreadsheet. Like, marketing from a spreadsheet, I think, is the wrong way to do marketing, right? And that all felt weird and wrong, and I pitched it in this meeting, and I just really wanted the job. I really wanted the chance to run marketing at a startup, and like, it went well because I had at least tried to be thoughtful about it as much as you could, right? But the entire premise that I came from was this: how many leads do I need to drive? What's my cost per lead? And the premise I should have come to in that interview is, how am I going to run marketing for you guys so that we actually win? Like, we win deals, and I'm not just going to throw over 1,000 leads to, at that point, an executive team that was trying to close.
Yeah, there seems to be a flaw in the argument that marketing should only be doing marketing activities that you can track.
Yeah.
Because so much of the buying process centers around things that just aren't necessarily trackable.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a dilemma for a lot of marketers, because we're told to be data-driven. We're told that you need to prove ROI of all of your efforts. And it's just like anything, like, people will immediately go to what's the easiest thing to measure, the easiest thing to do, right? They kind of like turn lazy. In reality, like, the easiest thing to measure is that small snippet of a buyer journey that digital tracking of a person across an internet like profile will give you, right? Or that your vendor tools like HubSpot or something will give you. The problem is, like, that's the easiest way to do it, but it, like, in my career personally and other people's careers I've seen, that doesn't actually relate to winning deals. Any marketer that's ever especially B2B marketers, any B2B marketer that's ever thrown an ebook on LinkedIn or Facebook can attest to this thing. They can tell you it's easy to get a lead from a Facebook ebook campaign, but any marketer that's done that and then called those people, like I have, like they realize I should never do that again. Like that was a terrible lead, and I probably shouldn't even call it a lead, right? Like you'll get on the phone with those people. I'm shocked they even would answer the call, but sometimes they'll be like, well, I didn't even fill that thing out. Like I don't even know who you are. And you're like, well, are they lying? Or is it literally just like, it's so easy for someone to fill out a form nowadays on a Facebook or LinkedIn that you just completely forgot you did it. And that's what Facebook and LinkedIn are like optimizing for. Like make it easy for you to turn a lead doesn't equate to make you a really solid lead that's going to win a deal at the end of the day, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what should marketing be doing differently?
Figuring out how to help their company win. So, and there's a lot that encompasses a ton.
That's the broad paintbrush stroke.
Yeah.
Now let's get into the details.
Yeah, but it's, it's winning. And one of the key things that I think a lot of marketers lose sight of is I'm going to measure everything by attribution when you should be measuring everything by how does my marketing impact a deal? And I'm not talking about marketing influenced revenue where you look into your CRM and you say, oh, they downloaded an ebook, so that's 2.2 percentage points to marketing. We influenced this person by 2%, whatever the hell that means. I don't even know how you measure marketing influenced revenue. You're like, I sent them a direct mail ABM kit of cookies, and so I think that attributed to 10% of the influence of the revenue. Like, you don't even know what if the dog ate the cookies or like their brother ate they have no idea like how, or was it were they allergic to the peanut butter cookies you sent them, and it actually was a negative? You don't know. In my opinion, the focus should be diving in deep with your buyers, having great probing conversations with them, specifically in this regard about how your brand strength, how your marketing activities actually influenced the deal. And I've heard pushback on this concept because like people's memories are fallible. They're not perfect. So people will tell me a lot of times, well, they're not going to remember the first time they heard about you if you ask them, how did you hear about us? They're not going to remember, like the digital footprint might be better at remembering that kind of stuff sometimes if it wasn't totally outside of that realm, like
right.
Word of mouth or whatever. But
like you're not going to have a prospect come through and be like, oh, I remember the first time I saw an ad for you guys on LinkedIn.
Right.
And then your CEO was a guest on a podcast that I listened to.
And that's what everybody's trying to measure. And it's like, who cares? What you're trying to understand is what was the most memorable thing, right? It wasn't the first thing.
Impact.
Yeah, but this person's going to remember what had the biggest impact. And to give you a really good example of that today, when I was trying to figure out what does our marketing budget, our go-to-market activity mix look like, and when I first came in to close, we weren't spending a ton on digital advertising, right? So a lot of marketers would come in and be like, well, digital advertising is kind of easy to get to scale. It's very quick. Let's just double down there and do it harder, right? But as I talk to more customers on both wins and losses, like that's a big thing too, is talking to buyers over your entire wins and loss portfolio, not just the customers that like you the most. Talking to them, one thing that really came to mind was a lot of people that had bought us, they didn't even look for another vendor. Like it was clearly, they would say things like, we saw how much you guys were caring about and promoting and doing content within this community that I'm a big believer in. And because of that, it got us so much brand trust. They didn't even look at other vendors. They were just like, yeah, I just needed the budget. If I could get the budget, I knew it was you guys. And if I had looked through this person's digital footprint, their attribution model that HubSpot would have told me, it would have said double down on Google ads, on paid search. And if I had ignored talking to them or looking at the feedback they had given, I wouldn't have ignored that, what HubSpot was telling me, and doubled down instead in this events network that we were starting to build, right? And it's been about 1.5 years since we kind of made that decision, and there's 100% clear-cut ROI from this. And then the other cool thing is, if I had put it into digital ads like paid search, maybe it still would have worked. Like this one-off person would have found me. But then I don't get the cool halo effect that I also get with this huge events push, because now I've got word of mouth generating in there. I also have thought leadership. Like if you ask people that have been to any of our workshops that I'm talking about specifically, they will immediately tell you, like, they'll associate close with win-loss as a thought leader, right? And paid search doesn't give you that. So it's like, which advertising or which marketing tactic actually drove a win and not a lead conversion?
I love this idea of thinking about what are the marketing efforts that are going to help us actually win deals, instead of marketing efforts that are trackable and look good on paper that we can take back to an executive team and see, look, you know.
Sure.
So if there's marketers who are watching this who are like, we probably should be spending more time thinking about the buyer experience and thinking about what are the most impactful things that we can do that will actually lead to a win, not necessarily just capturing somebody's data through a white paper download. How do you justify, because some of those activities aren't necessarily super trackable.
Sure.
How do you turn around and then have that conversation with your executive team and tell them, hey, we're going to maybe shift our focus from the thing that has a really obvious quote unquote ROI and then spend your time on things that are less trackable.
You make them trackable. So I like to compare it to like Net Promoter Score and the customer journey and customer success teams. Like they've figured out a way to, when a customer goes through a journey and they're talking to a customer success manager and they're doing Net Promoter Score, they look at this stuff, but not in the same way as marketers do. They're not looking at like, well, which channel did they come in from last to enter our product? Like, did they come in from the homepage or was it word of mouth? They're more focused on like, what is that customer's journey? And then they're asking that customer through surveys and conversation, like, hey, what's going on? Are you happy with us? Are we good? How's the contract going? How likely are you to recommend us to other companies? And so they've figured it out, right? Like a Net Promoter Score is a clear score, and there's like some pros and cons to it, but it's actually trying.
Yeah.
So on the marketing side, we've never tried to do the same thing. Like, well, how do we measure somebody's buying experience and how the marketing is hitting on that, other than they saw this thing, right? Or this thing had an impression. Well, yeah, LinkedIn told you it had an impression, but you have no idea what the impression actually was for the person unless they like liked it or something. But even then, it's like so in my opinion, and that's what's cool about win-loss analysis, is you can interview these people or survey them and specifically call out marketing initiatives that you're wondering if they had an impact. For example, content could be a great one. Like, how did the content that we hired 10 full-time people around and we've spent all this money on doing, right? How did that actually impact our wins? How did that impact our buyers? And when you ask these people, they can give you a score of that. They can tell you, well, it had no influence. Like, I never even saw the content. Or, yeah, I saw this article you guys did.
And then I subscribed to your YouTube channel. And I listen to your podcast every week.
100%.
And I've been listening to your podcast for like 5 months, begging my manager to give us budget for this.
Yeah, exactly. So you're like, okay, well, that's clearly like a strong positive, right? And now it's trackable. Like, you at least have a sentiment analysis on our content marketing, for the most part, strongly influences people to move to the next stage of the buying cycle. Or you could even like track it to, it has a strong correlated influence on our win rate, which is way cooler in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
So in my mind, it's like, let's make this stuff trackable. Like, let's stop, messing around with the attribution thing that everybody kind of has a sense is broken. And they're still trying to figure out like, well, let's do multi-touch, or let's just get more tools on top of it, or whatever it is. Like, no, let's actually just track what influenced a win and forget about this side, because guess what? Like, that data will also come from this, like in my example.
Yeah, it's like the data that we get from most advertising efforts right now is it's quantitative only. There's no qualitative data.
Sure.
And getting some qualitative data, even just to pair up with the quantitative data, could be really impactful. Like, even just kind of expounding on this example that we just made up. Like how powerful would it be to have 10 or 15 interviews with clients who signed on with you, and maybe in 6 of those interviews where you ask them about marketing efforts, they do talk about your podcast.
Yeah.
And you realize you can go back if you tracked everything properly, you can go back and look at the sales cycle for each one of those. And maybe the sales cycle for podcast listeners is 2 months shorter than somebody else. Or maybe they come in and they're just more prepared to buy, and you don't have to nurture them through a 3-month email drip cycle to turn them into an actual
100%.
Customer.
Yeah,
or maybe the likelihood that they convert is much higher than, so maybe the value of one podcast lead or one YouTube video lead or whatever is 10 times higher than a paid LinkedIn ad.
Yeah, it 100% is. And if you're doing this the right way, your marketing should do that. Your marketing should decrease your sales cycle length. It should increase your win rate, and you should be sending more qualified leads to your sales team, because you've done that job of what everybody's talking about nowadays, where buyers are educating themselves 80% of the way to a decision, and then that last 20% is them talking to a sales rep. And there's even talk of like, let's kill that too. Like, as a lot of buyers are out there saying, I don't even want to talk to a sales rep anymore. Like, I've done 80%, I'm pretty much there, just let me buy.
Right.
Which there's some merit to that, but I'm also like a fan of complicated sales, having a good consultative guide in that process.
Yeah.
Especially for junior buyers, I have no idea how to like actually buy and sell things internally and get the buy-in. They might be 80% of the way there and they're like, oh, this is amazing. And then they go to their boss and it's like, okay, it's not so amazing. I can't even get budget for it. So if you're doing this the right way, all those metrics should improve. And I would stack up 500 or more, depending on how it goes, ebook downloads from Facebook ads versus a handful or a few very, like, if somebody listened to an entire podcast episode, that would be amazing. And I have seen some companies like attempt this. There's a kind of it's in B2C, you see it a lot, like, how did you hear about us? A self-reported attribution on forums. You see that in B2C all the time. B2B is like almost tried to be too smart for its own good, where it's like, we don't need to just ask them. Like, we've got all this digital technology, we can just track them. We don't even need to ask.
We've got dashboards.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, well, there's no harm in just asking.
Right.
But there's an interesting thing there too, is like, how did you hear about us is one part of the equation. How did we win you over is a way bigger question. And you don't see that a ton. Like, it would be cool, even just as a simple, once a person signs up and the deal is closed, you asked when they became a lead, how did you hear about us? And then as soon as the contract's signed, like, another email comes and it's like, how did we win you over? Like, that's a lot cooler, right?
What made us stand out?
Yeah. What did we need to improve? What almost made you not choose us, right? And like, go fix that stuff. And we don't do that nearly enough.
Yeah, I know, at least from my perspective, I get a lot of content ideas based off of, we'll do a whole session on that. But part of marketing's job is to educate a buyer before they talk to a salesperson, to get them as prepared as possible before they get on the phone call with somebody and get really serious about buying.
Yeah.
I don't care how long you've been in the game, there's always going to be holes in that journey for different personas. There's going to be, content that's missing or that doesn't get delivered at the right time or that hasn't been created yet. And for me, at least in the time that I've been here, the fastest way that I can find those holes is by going through our interviews, won and lost deals.
For sure.
To figure out, oh man, we're not communicating this message as clearly as we thought we were.
Yeah. Yeah. And we could dive all into like the content effectiveness created around win-loss programs and how it shows you your gaps. Like, oh, this is clearly a weakness they think we have, when in reality it's not. Like, this is a strength. We just haven't shown them that it's a strength, and we haven't taught our sales reps how to show them that it's a strength, or none of us are even aware it's a strength until they say it, right? So yeah, there's a whole conversation we can have around how win-loss drives content. But the other part of it is like outside of content, and content helps this, just the overall brand strength and reputation. Like, for example, you may have a killer product. I've seen this multiple times. I've done a few buyer interviews myself just to get a feel for, like, how does win-loss work? How do you talk to buyers? And one thing I see a lot of is a company like Gong, right? They've done an amazing job of telling this story of, we're thought leaders. We know what sales reps are doing right and wrong, and we've got all this amazing data. And like, they've done great stuff with like Gong Labs, and super, super cool. go-to-market motion, and not even just a go-to-market motion, but a way to position themselves as the brand authority on this. Like, I can't think of a faster climb in that conversation than them in the last little while. And I've talked to a few competitors of theirs that it's kind of like they have 80% of the product. Like, they've taken enough of it and they can do 80% of the same thing. And I've talked to people that have evaluated both of these companies. And at the end of the day, most of these buyers, what they said was, yeah, these guys can do 80% of the job. So it's not a feature thing that's making me decide here. It's which one do I trust when I go to my leadership team and say, I'm going to put this much amount of money, which isn't a small amount, into this vendor. Which one do I feel like I'm not going to get laughed out of the room with? Which one do I trust is going to actually make me look amazing in my job and be successful and get my promotion or hit my number? And if your company is setting up your brand authority and positioning in such a way that it makes that conversation easier, you have this other moat on top of like feature parity, right? And that's a big part of it too, is it's like you start to see those gaps. And so when I was doing these interviews, I went back to this company. I'm like, hey, by the way, one thing that keeps getting brought up is you guys don't even have a G2 crowd profile. Like, there's no way for anybody to go and even compare you in the network of other buyers how you've ranked in reviews, right? You have to at least do that. Like, if you're not going to go crazy in content and create this brand authority, like, at least put some brand trust out there, right? And it was interesting because that was a total blind spot to them because they were so busy chasing feature parity that they ignored what would set up our brand strength and reputation to compete. And I think win-loss can guide a marketer to that. Like, well, what are other channels that people look to? What are other resources that buyers look to know if they can trust a brand? And a huge one right now is community. Like, most buyers, if you ask them, and Google is kind of like interesting in this, maybe they should be thinking about this. Most buyers nowadays do not jump on Google and search like which is the best tool for X, Y, and Z. They go to their Slack channel or they go to their network of people they know are awesome at their job and they ask them like, hey, which tools do you use? I mean, that's how I chose the CMS that I'm using right now, the CRM that I'm using right now. That's even how I've hired people, right? It's like, go to your network and figure out what are winning tools. And you're not going to ever find that conversation and that in any sort of lead attribution tool, right? And you'll never know, like, oh, our brand strength and reputation is such that this whole community, every time people ask, they always reference us, right? And if they aren't, you'll also figure that out in a win-loss analysis, and then you can game plan and figure out ways to make that motion start to move. So it impacts marketing strategy in more ways than people think about, right? I think a lot of times win-loss analysis, for one, it's been done ineffectively, so people don't think of it as contributing to wins. And also it's been thought of as this one-off research-based project, maybe for like a big deal they lost or something we just want to understand. And then let's send that data to the sales team and maybe they'll improve. Like, no, this should be a core function inside of your company, especially in your marketing team, to figure out how the heck should you be messaging to people, where should you be messaging to people, who are the right people. Like, we've had a lot of companies tell us, man, you guys clearly helped us identify our ICP, or like a cool one that one customer said, our UCP, I think is what he called it, an ideal candidate or a customer profile. I'm like, that's amazing. Like, you, especially as a startup with strapped resources, they were wasting a ton of money on this UCP because internally they thought like this is a cool opportunity, and they weren't wrong.
They would say yes to anybody who knocked on their door.
Yeah, exactly, and that happens.
How can we take your money?
Yeah, you're like
and
starving for a sale.
Their churn was like,
yeah, exactly, and their win rate was like completely tanked too. So it's kind of mind blowing to me that we have so much debate and so much wasted mental energy around lead attribution models and lead scoring models, and so little focus on like, well, what is marketing actually doing to just help us win better? And honestly, like in a company with a strong sales motion, a lot of marketers are like, well, I don't want to be a service to salespeople. Like, they feel like that's the worst thing in the world. I'm like, you're not. Like, you are helping your company win. If you need to create material that helps your salesperson win, you should do that. And I love the Gong CMO in a podcast once said, like, what's the mission of your marketing team? And it wasn't like be the ultra creative brand or be like, totally outside the box thinking. It was make sales easier, like super simple. And he doesn't view himself as like this subservient service to the sales team there, but he knows what the goal of marketing is like, let's just make sales for the company easier. Like everyone have an easier time with it because we're educating better. We're establishing brand trust. Our win rates are going to go up. Our deal cycles are going to go down. And to me, that should be like a huge goal of the marketing team.
If not the goal of the marketing team.
Exactly.
If you're not doing that, what are you doing?
Yeah, 100%. I love looking at our marketing reporting here more in that realm of let's do a deep, thorough understanding of why we win and lose and track and score our marketing based on that. And to me, I love the feeling when we go through the win-loss analysis internally of closed, and we can look at those subject areas, we call them decision drivers, of like what drove the decision, and some of them are specifically marketing based, and I can clearly say like on the general outlook of our win rate, marketing is a positive influence on this, like all of the initiatives we're doing. And then I can dive deeper and be like, specifically this program that my events marketer like planned for 3 months and blood, sweat, and tears over the dang thing, and was always wondering, like in other companies you throw those leads over the fence and you kind of never really know, did this event pay off or not?
Right.
I mean, especially the bigger the company gets, like you don't really know. But if you can dive in there as an events marketer or as a content marketer and read some of these, like that to me is cool, awesome, like fire for your
when somebody's
job.
like, oh yeah, like the best thing for me was when I went to this event and
totally, I
heard your team speak. I was like, oh my gosh, it totally changed the way that I think about things. And I knew right there that if I ever hired a third party, it would be you guys.
It would be you guys, yep.
And sure, they downloaded the ebook, and sure, they looked at the reviews on G2, and sure, they did all these other things. Yeah. But really, what it boiled down to was that event.
Yeah. If you want to talk about like how to motivate and win as a marketing team on, like generally we've talked about it, but if you want to go all the way down to like your individual team member and your employee and like how do you reduce burnout and like the boredom of, I created 1,000 leads. Well, who cares? Nobody ever is going to know, right? And in big companies, that's a thing. Like give them this data and then show it. Hey, so-and-so worked on this podcast series. So-and-so worked on this event. So-and-so wrote this ebook.
Maybe
right?
the ebook is crazy good.
Ebook, like sometimes ebooks are amazing, right? Or they worked on this course or whatever it is, and you can show them, hey, did you know you like totally helped win this deal? Like that's a way better way to motivate your employee than great job on the 2,000 leads uploaded this month.
I mean, that was the best part of my week last week.
Right, yeah.
So I'm relatively new to closed still.
Right, yeah.
I hosted like a virtual part of a virtual segment of a virtual event with a partner of ours. Yeah. And somebody reached out to me afterwards and they're like, hey, I want to know more. And I was able to provide our sales team with a warm lead.
Yeah, exactly.
And everybody cheered for me. It was like my first appointment set. And it was like a big deal, but it was like I played a hand in potentially creating some revenue for the company. And
100%.
That was like exciting.
Yeah. And a ton of marketers I've talked to recently feel that. And what they tell me is, I want to be at a company where I can feel my impact on revenue. Yeah. And they're all told, like, be revenue-minded marketer, and revenue's the ultimate goal, and that's how marketing should be measured. And all of them are sitting there like, I don't know how to do that. Yeah. And no one ever shows me how, and the dashboarding tools don't do it. And even when they do, it's like marketing influence revenue. Nobody really like totally believes the number, you know what I mean? And it's like, just have a good conversation with the buyer, and the buyer will tell you, hey, so-and-so at this event that they planned, it was perfect. And it helped me understand you guys are leaders and I wanted to buy this thing. I can't think of a cooler motivator to, is your job making an impact or not? Like, you're this buyer, and you can show them the deal size. Like, dude, that thing you did just created this much revenue. Not, your cost per lead was this much and you have 5,000 leads come through from these channels, we think, but we don't really know for sure. We've discounted that by 70% because the lead scoring model regulates that, and then they're immediately like taken out of the win, and like, who cares? Like, is this really an exciting job? Is this cool? Like, not as cool.
No.
Yeah. So
So last question before we wrap up is for a marketing leader who's watching right now and going, yes, we need to bring the humanity back into marketing. We need to bring the stories. We want some qualitative data. We want maybe to figure out how to do this more, this type of attribution. What would you say are the first couple of steps that they should be taking to make a shift? Because it might go against the grain with the executive team because they've never had marketing report to them in that way.
Sure.
It might go against a lot of marketing instinct that they have going on. So what tips do you have for a marketing leader who wants to at least integrate this aspect of tracking their marketing efforts into the traditional attribution model?
Yeah, I think marketing leaders that spend zero time talking to even their customers are missing the huge point of their job. So I would start there for sure. Like if you can't get buy-in, if you're not going to get at least try to go out and talk to your customers. And like at this point, even if they are your happiest customers, like at least start there. And it's a lot harder to go talk to a lost prospect that like it totally hated your company and your sales team. Like they're probably not going to chat with you, right? But that's where I would go next. It's like, well, why don't you try? And there's a lot of hurdles around that. Like, you know, some sales teams definitely don't want people messing around with those conversations and like having communication with contacts that they don't know about and they want to like control everything. But that's where I would start is like you should be talking to your customers already, not in the sense of like, I need this from you, customer. Like a lot of times I'll go out and be like, okay, I'm going to go talk to my customers and I'm going to find an amazing case study, or I'm going to get them to leave a review, or I'm going to try to get a referral out of them, or I'm going to upsell them. Like don't just purely go into it as like,
no agenda.
Yeah. Like I'm your buddy and just tell me what it is you loved and hated about the process of buying from our company, and no, you're not going to defend anything. This is a mistake a lot of people make too, is like in that conversation, the customer or the buyer, whatever you want to call it, will say like, well, you guys were not great at this thing, or you don't have this feature or whatever it is. And they'll immediately be like, oh, but no, we totally do. And it's like, that's not what's important. It doesn't matter if the buyer is wrong. It's their perception is what matters. Yeah. That tells you a ton. It tells you your marketing team is totally missing educating this person, right? So don't jump in there and defend everything. Like just listen and soak that perspective in and build that empathy, right? So that you can actually help them. So I would for sure start there. The second one is like, you know, this is a hot button issue for marketers, but you need to make sure your sales and marketing relationship is solid, right? And if your marketing focus has been for so long, like we're all about brand and which isn't a bad thing, but if the sales team has never felt like you're in their corner, like why are they going to be cool with you talking with their customers? But if you're the type of marketer who's like the sales team is coming to you and saying, hey, I've got this deal happening, like what can I do better? Or will you jump on the call with me? Like they know you're good at that and they trust you. They're going to be much more open to like, well, yeah, this is kind of cool. Like I'm happy if you go talk to them. And like, heck, you can include them on the call as long as they understand, like, this isn't a crawback. Like, we're not going to clawback, what they call it. We're not going to try to resell this closed lost opportunity. So I would start there. It's like, to me, you got to at least try to do it yourself. And if you're beyond capable of doing that, or you're not going to try to hire somebody, right? Like us. But even if you hired someone to do your win-loss analysis, I still think you should be out there talking to your customers and growing those relationships. And then the other part is make sure that sales marketing relationship is open, collaborative, both sides. Like it's not a finger pointing thing, which can be tough in climates where you're in a downturn and things are getting tight and everybody's getting stressed. But I haven't seen many teams win when that immediately turns into a blame game. I've only seen teams turn that around and face that when they like band together, band of brothers, right? And like totally take it head on. So that's probably the two places I'd start.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing some stories, and I appreciate you also towards the end here getting into the more tactical, practical stuff and not just leaving it as a concept for people to chew on.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of marketing leaders who are attending Win Last Week who are going to hear this and they'll think, oh, I never thought of using win-loss this way. I
Right.
never thought of talking to our customers with this objective in mind.
Yeah.
And my hope is that some of you who are watching go out and take action. Like, go interview 5 customers in the next quarter and just see what happens.
Yeah.
You might get something really, really valuable out of it.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks, Nate.
Hopefully we can shift that narrative together, shift the way that marketing teams approach attribution.
That's right.